just going to do a quick introduction. My name's Laura from Liberty Hive, and we're really excited to have JourneyHR today, who we've been working with, I think, from the since Liberty Hive launched 4 years ago, and you guys have been great supporters and help. So yeah, it's great to be hosting this webinar with you guys today. And I mean, I know I'm going to learn a lot from this session in terms of what's coming up with Labour's employment rights. So I'm going to hand over to Danielle and Holly, and yeah, I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Great, thank you so much. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Hopefully we'll all get something out of this session, but the main aim really is to talk through kind of upcoming changes that are being proposed by the new Labour government, and what that means for businesses, as we know so far. I think there's a big caveat around all of this, in that it's all still at proposal stage. We don't quite know exactly what will come in and what it will look like in the end, but we've got some ideas of what that might look like. We are recording the session, so that will go out after this as well, if you want to go back to it. We've got about an hour and a half in the diary for the session. We don't think we're going to use the whole time kind of for us to talk to you, so that gives us plenty of time for questions, discussions, or we might finish up a bit early and give you a bit of time back. As we kind of go through this, we're more than happy for you to just interject and sort of shout out at us if you've got questions or comments as we go, or if you'd prefer to write a question in the notes and we run through things at the end. Also happy with that, however you want to engage, but we want this to be as sort of interactive as possible for everyone as well. So just very quickly, JourneyHR, who we are. So we are an HR consultancy. We work mainly with founder-owned businesses, so kind of small to medium size, but our clients kind of range from the real startups where they might have 2 or 3 employees, all the way up to big businesses who have their own HR team and just need some support on projects, engagement surveys, that sort of thing. So we've got a real range of clients that we work with and support them in however they need support, to be honest. And the big thing, kind of our mantra, is to help businesses create great places to work. And that's what we're always striving to do. And then just to introduce myself and Holly. So I'm HR director, or one of the HR directors at Journey. I've been in HR for almost 17 years, and at Journey for over 10. So I've kind of been lucky enough to see the kind of evolution of the business from 4 people all the way up to where we are today at 22 people, and kind of all the exciting changes that have happened throughout that time. And I guess a big part of my role is providing strategic advice to kind of senior stakeholders and clients, and trying to help clients just continuously keep ahead of the game and make sure that they are creating those great places to work. And I will just hand over to Holly briefly to introduce herself as well.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Holly. Bit of a disclaimer before I introduce myself. I have got a horrible cold that everyone seems to have in London at the moment. So if I need to cough or take a drink or mute myself, bear with me, and I will hopefully get through the next hour and a half without annoying you too much with this bizarre voice that I currently have. So I've been at Journey 6 years, and I've been working in HR for around 10 years now. And I am one of the heads of HR at Journey. Quite like Danielle, I've seen the evolution of Journey. When I first joined, I believe there were 8 people, and I've now seen the growth of that, working all through the pandemic and the fun of that. And similarly, kind of work with clients to really help them create great places to work, and making kind of synergies between their HR strategies and their business objectives, while working with their senior stakeholders, but also kind of running the Journey team as well.
Thank you. So what we're going to run through today, quite a lot of stuff here that we're going to be talking through. And as I say, please shout out if you've got questions as we go. But we're going to start off by just giving a bit of a summary of what is the Make Work Pay manifesto. And then we're going to go into not all of the points that they've put in the manifesto, but we've pulled out some of the things that we think are going to be most sort of relevant and are potentially going to have the most sort of impact on businesses. So, you know, these things: unfair dismissal, flexible working, changes to contracts, right to switch off, and sexual harassment legislation. And then at the end, we're just going to do a little bit around the kind of upcoming changes in April this year, just to make sure that everyone's aware of that and are prepared for them. So I'll hand over to Holly again.
Thank you. So in terms of where all these changes have come from, as Danielle said, it's the Make Work Pay manifesto that Labour has introduced. In terms of the aims that they've really set out, is to boost wages, to make work more secure, and supporting working people to thrive. And in terms of how they're going, or how they're proposing to make these come to life, I'll quickly start with boosting wages. And one of the points that they said in here is increasing the national minimum wage, which we normally do see happen every kind of new tax year, and also proposing to remove the age band that comes with that national minimum wage. And establishing something that they're calling a genuine living wage that reflects the actual cost of living in the UK, which I think we can all attest to, that we feel that we've kind of felt the increases there over the last couple of years. They're also, within boosting wages, they are putting more emphasis on the current legislation that surrounds equal pay in the workplace. And also, large companies are going to have to start reporting on ethnicity and disability pay gap reporting. And that will be businesses over 250 employees and more. They currently have to report on gender pay gap, but it's the introduction of the ethnicity and the disability element that will be new for those types of businesses. In terms of make work more secure, they plan to do this by addressing a number of things, and what comes underneath this is the day one rights, and we'll go into this in more detail later on. But they're also planning to ban exploitive 0-hour contracts, and to end fire and rehire practices which companies engage in at the moment. The last thing that I'll mention on this is that they're planning to also introduce something called a Fair Work Agency, which is going to be created to really enforce workers' rights, but also to look at compliance across multiple industries, where they will also plan to work more closely with trade unions and employees in partnership to think about recommendations and any other changes that need to come through there. Lastly, the point is to support working people to thrive. Again, some examples which we'll talk through today, but very quickly, examples here are things like reviewing the carers leave policy that we currently have, and making it more supportive for people who do have caring responsibilities. Also under this is clarification on bereavement leave and further extension of how that relates to people in the workplace. And also making the flexible working policy surrounding your day one right stronger, essentially, so that there is more grounds for employees to put that in, and businesses are really going to have to show why they aren't approving those requests coming through. And that will help with balancing work-life balance, and then bleeds into your right to switch off as well, which fits under that, supporting working people to thrive. In terms of the legislation that the King's speech spoke to, it spoke to the Employment Bill 2024, and the key updated provisions that are going to fall under that are the 0-hour contract ban, which I spoke to just now, the end of the hire and firing regime, and the day one rights, and some other points as well. And again, the Equality and Race Disability Bill, the main things that really fit under this is the ethnicity and disability pay gap reporting that they're going to introduce, really shining a light on the law to create equal pay across ethnicity minorities, and making it much easier to bring a claim at tribunal for unfair and unequal pay within the workplace. So we'll go on to talking about some of these in a bit more detail. So where we will first begin, bear with me, I'm going to take a little sip, as I said I would, is the day one rights. So it's really important, as Danielle said at the beginning, that a lot of these are just proposals at the moment, and we don't have a lot of the detail in terms of when they're going to actually come into place and the confirmed details of how they're going to show up as part of legislation. The first thing is obviously, why are they doing this? They're doing this to really strengthen employee security within the workplace and to improve workers' rights as well, and ensure that we're treating employees fairly from the very start of their employment with businesses. When they were looking into this, the rate at which people have been moving jobs has actually been steadily declining, which has risks on productivity, because people are basically waiting for a long period of time to get their basic rights, which means that the risk of moving jobs falls solely on the individual, and therefore it's a scarier thing to jump jobs when you know you're going to have to wait, in some cases, a significant period of time to get those employee rights. So the introduction of these day one rights, they hope, will help encourage more mobility in the workplace and within workforces, which is said to increase productivity. So in terms of where we'll start, let's start with sick pay. So currently, where we stand with sick pay is that it obviously forms part of our legislation, and there's statutory sick pay. But you can only claim statutory sick pay after the first 3 days of sickness within the workplace. So the current proposal is to remove that, so that employees will be eligible for statutory sick pay from the first day of illness, eliminating that 3-day waiting period. The second thing that they're proposing to change in relation into this is to remove the lower earning limit that you have to qualify for SSP. So this means that all employees, regardless of their income, will qualify for SSP regardless of what level of pay that they receive. What they've said currently is that they do expect that this change in relation to sick pay to come into law in 2026. And how this will impact businesses will really probably depend on how many low-income employees you have within your workforce, to see whether it's actually directly going to have an impact on your business. It will also obviously depend on your sick leave policy and your enhanced pay element of that policy. A lot of businesses do enhance company or their sick pay and have company sick pay, and therefore statutory pay doesn't actually come into effect until after they've exhausted all of their company sick pay. What this means from an impact point of view is that there may be higher costs to a business if people are going to be eligible to take time off and be paid for that. It's not expected to have large effects on businesses in terms of higher costs, but there may be a slight change that you see there. In terms of our recommendations around sick pay, for now, it's to really review your sick pay policy to ensure that it's right for your business, to ensure that you're happy with the costs associated with people taking time off and being eligible to that sick pay. And then also thinking about your longer term absent management policies to ensure that they are up to date and that people really know how to engage with them and how to enforce them if you need to within your business. The second point that I'll come on to now is regarding parental leave and paternity leave. So the changes that they're proposing here is that they become a day one right. So paternity leave will become a day one right entitlement, removing the current 26-week qualification period that employees have to meet in order to take that time. Likewise with parental leave, which is currently you must have 1 year service in order to take parental leave. And the policy is currently sat at 18 weeks leave for each child up to the age of their 18th birthday. So they're removing that 1 year qualification, and you'll be able to engage in that from day one of employment under this proposal. With all the other kind of parental policies, the government they have made a commitment to review all of the kind of the parental leave rights, including shared parental leave and adoption leave, mostly to meet kind of the modern day family setup, but also to encourage people to use policies such as shared parental leave and paternity leave, which over the years, when they've looked at the use of them, they haven't been as successful as they had wanted when they were first kind of put under legislation. So they want to try and make that more attractive for people to engage in. Again, all of those changes in relation to the family-friendly leaves are expected to come into law in 2026, but they haven't confirmed any of kind of the further details surrounding them, just the initial proposals. With them, the impact on businesses, again, is potential higher cost to the business because employees are going to have the right to take that time off earlier in their employment, which at the moment, there's obviously a waiting period in order for them to gauge with that. So again, just thinking about that and looking at your policies and how that could impact your business, particularly if you're a small business, and looking at the cost that kind of looks at. The bits in orange we'll come into in a bit more detail further on in the slides. But does anyone have any questions on the parental leave updates or the sick pay?
Yeah, sorry, I've just got a quick one. What was it with the paternity leave? Can you just go over paternity leave again, please?
Of course. So paternity leave, the proposal is to make it a day one entitlement. So first day from the employment, they would be eligible to take paternity leave if they needed to. Currently, as it stands, there is a 26-week qualifying period in order to take paternity leave. So the proposal is to remove that, making it far more accessible for people at the very beginning of their employment.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Any other questions? Perfect. If you wouldn't mind changing slides, Dee. Wonderful. So the next change that I'll speak to now, and this is probably the one that we've had the most questions on within our client basis, and the one that I think is probably the most alarming for businesses and is likely to have the most impact. Again, they haven't published the full details around this, but currently, under our current legislation, employers do not technically have to follow a formal process to remove someone from their business under 2 years of service. So an example of that is if someone is underperforming, and let's say they'd have 18 months service, you could technically run a shortened performance management process, meet with them on kind of a shorter window, terminate them early, and much earlier than a formal process would allow you to do so. And they'd still have the right to their notice and payment in lieu of notice. But what they couldn't do is claim an unfair dismissal claim through a tribunal. You, of course, if you are terminating someone under 2 years currently, you obviously cannot discriminate against them, against a protected characteristic, but you don't have to formally go through a process in order to remove them. What the current manifesto is proposing is that they remove the 2 year service in order to claim unfair dismissal with towards a business if they let you go. The specifics around what that's going to look like in terms of whether that will be a day one right or let's say from 1 year is still uncertain. They are debating that at the moment. But as I said, this is going to be kind of the biggest change here. This will not be made before 2026. So there is time to work out the best practice approach in terms of how to manage this within the business and what changes you need to make to protect yourself. What we do know currently is that it's very likely that probation periods are going to remain, but they will be more important than ever. We currently see in some businesses, probation periods not being taken as seriously because there is that extra window of making sure that you can kind of do something within those 2 years.
Holly, I've got a question on that.
Yes.
Do you think, because obviously you said there's a bit of time for preparation, it's coming in 2026, but do you think companies might extend probationary periods to protect themselves a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a point I was just going to make
Oh,
later
sorry.
on. No, I can cover it now. There's no problem at all. But yes, that's our advice to clients at the moment, because if you hire someone now, if the change does go through in terms of removing the 2 year kind of bracket, they'll be within that protection where they're going to be able to remove them from the business. So anyone you hire now, you need to be sure that you are assessing their performance appropriately. So we're recommending that a lot of businesses change their probation periods to 6 months so that you have a proper period to assess performance, as well as the fact that hybrid working has made it harder for some businesses to properly assess how people are performing. So that is an easy win that we think businesses should think about doing now for anyone that they're hiring, making sure you do have a proper 6-month period probation where you can assess how they're doing.
And would that be for all levels? Because that's quite unusual to have a 6-month probationary period for, an exec, a manager. You always associated those long probation periods with really senior people.
Yeah, of course. And I think that is because there has been more flexibility, right? And how to manage performance within a business in a fairly flexible way if someone is under 2 years. That level of flexibility under this proposal isn't going to be there. So regardless of level, that protection is gone. So we are seeing across the board that 6-month probation period is standard regardless of level, or is becoming more standard regardless of level, so that you can protect yourself as a business in making the right decisions for that person, fitting into the team and having the expected level of performance. So yes, the theme is that people are moving away from it being based on seniority, because that flexibility won't be there.
Okay, thank you.
I think, sorry, just to add, Holly, I think even if you move to a 6-month probation period, if it's clear in the first 3 months that someone is performing and they're actually, brilliant at their job, doesn't mean to say you can't pass their probation earlier. It just gives you that opportunity that if you need the whole 6 months, you can use it without having to go through the process of extending probation, which we think will become more difficult under this new proposal. So you may still find that there's lots of people who do pass probations earlier than 6 months. Just gives businesses that longer window.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that flexibility. And as Danielle kind of just mentioned there, we are expecting some additional rules around probation management and what that looks like. There are proposals that between 6 and 9 months is going to be kind of the maximum time that you can have someone on probation. So if you did have a 6-month probation period, you'd obviously only have an additional 3-month window in order to extend that person to continually review kind of their performance. There is a possibility as well that they're going to introduce kind of more legitimate reasons as to why you are extending someone's probation, so not as loose as it currently is. This reflects legislation that is currently in Ireland. They think there may be similarities there in how that's kind of managed. So there will be more stringent rules there. Also, what we think there will be an emphasis on is, again, more stringent rules and visibility in terms of what actually a fair dismissal looks like in terms of failing someone's probation. So expect to see more detail around that once they've kind of gone through reviewing the bill. So our advice in relation to this, as I mentioned earlier, is to think about increasing your probation periods to 6 months as a standard, allowing to really properly assess someone's suitability to the role. It's going to be likely that it's going to be harder to extend those probation periods as well. And I think it's really important to ensure that you have a really robust probation period process within your business that everyone's really clear on, in having regular check-ins throughout that 6-month window, so not leaving it 6 months where they're assessing performance, giving feedback and highlighting areas to be addressed, with quite robust proof that you've gone through that process as well, which under current legislation you don't necessarily have to have in order to terminate or fail that probation period. With that review of probation periods, what we would also advise, because there will be more risk and there will be more need to manage probations effectively, we would advise that you train or retrain your managers on how to really manage a probation period and to manage performance during that probation period as well. So a couple of things that you can do prior to this change actually coming into legislation, because we have got about a year until they propose to make those changes. Any questions on this part of the manifesto? Perfect. Over to you, Dee.
Thank you. So the next point we're going to talk about is flexible working. So this is legislation that has already changed over the last couple of years. So the Conservative government actually made it a day one right in April last year, so that any employee can request a flexible working arrangement from their first day of employment. What the Labour government is proposing to do is to take that even further into kind of the to the employee's benefit, and make it a default right from day one. And what that essentially means is that employees won't technically have to put in a request to work flexibly. Excuse me, they will inform the business that they want to work flexibly. We know that there will be some level of process that you'll still have to go through, and that employers will still be able to reject a flexible working arrangement if there is a legitimate reason why it can't work for the business. But there's going to be more onus on the employer to be able to come up with that justification. And the employee has basically more rights to kind of push for more flexibility in how they work going forwards. We know that this is already can be quite difficult for businesses where we're all in this kind of hybrid world of working. We've got some, businesses who are in the office 2 days a week, some in 3, some even, in 4. And we're even seeing, in the banking sector that they want everyone in 5 days a week. And, there are overarching business reasons as to why employers have decided that those kind of ratios. But when it comes to flexible working requests, those kind of overarching business reasons don't stand up. You will have to look at each individual case and be able to come up with a legitimate business reason as to why that individual cannot work in the way that they're asking to work. So for instance, if you have a working arrangement of 3 days in the office, 2 days from home, currently an employee says, I'm going to work from home 4 days a week and I'll only be in 1 day, even though the rest of your business might be working to that 3-2 model, and that works, you still will have to assess this individual request, and have to come up with a legitimate business reason as to why that individual couldn't work 4 days from home and 1 day in the office. And there are currently reasons why you can do that. And again, under this proposal, they're not wanting to change that. And these are things like puts too much pressure on other people in the business. It might be too costly for the business to accept the arrangement. It might be that the times that the individual's asking to work just don't fit with the type of work that the business is doing. There's kind of 8 reasons why you can reject a flexible working request, which we think will still remain, but it's just going to be more onus on the employer to be able to prove that the request doesn't work. Again, we don't know for definite exactly what this is all going to look like, but I think as a preparation for this, it's definitely worth businesses considering what's the best setup for the business, building a rationale around that, and even starting to look at different teams, so that if you do have someone request a flexible working request in a particular team, you've already kind of started that thinking in terms of, could it actually work if someone wanted to work from home, let's say full-time, or if somebody wanted to reduce their hours from 5 days a week to 3 days a week, and what that would look like, and starting to build those business cases as to why for certain roles and for certain teams, how you're currently working is the ideal, and not only the ideal, but actually most other ways of working are not going to be feasible. So we would definitely start thinking about it, start looking at it. We believe this is probably going to be one of the things that isn't going to change hugely from the manifesto, and will go through pretty much as is, because it's just building on what they've already put in place. I said we don't yet know exactly what those process will look like in terms of how you'll be able to reject it, and what are the steps that you'll need to go through. There definitely, as I say, will be an opportunity for businesses to reject flexible working arrangements. We just aren't sure yet kind of how much will it swing in the employee's favour compared to what it looks like at the moment. Any questions on flexible working? Okay, so we'll move on to contracts. So the first thing around contracts is the fire and rehire practices. So what we sort of unfortunately saw during the pandemic was that this was something that a lot of businesses almost were forced to do. And essentially what it is you terminate your employees' contracts as they currently stand, but you offer them immediately another contract which is on less favourable terms than their current contract. And currently this is still legal, although obviously there are lots of rules around it, and you can't just blanket start doing firing and rehiring. But I guess the pandemic was a good example of where there was a legitimate reason that businesses just could not afford to continue employing people under their current contracts, and they were forced to offer employees lesser terms than what they had, and obviously that then forced employees to accept those lesser terms, because the alternative was no job, and obviously at that time no one was hiring, no one knew what was happening, so employees were forced to take less favourable terms without really much choice. This is obviously isn't a practice that we would advocate. We, in 99.9% of circumstances, there is a way around it where, firing and rehiring isn't necessary. But it is still legal. Under the Labour's manifesto, they are looking to make the fire and rehire practice an automatically unfair process, unless a company is in really dire financial circumstances. And what they basically mean by that is, if a company is at the point of going insolvent, going bankrupt, those sorts of situations where going through a fire and rehire practice could potentially save the business from going into that insolvency, bankruptcy situation, they would probably consider that to be a legal situation. But that would pretty much be the only situation that that would be accepted as a legal process. Any other situation, so essentially, if a company is solvent, has the money to pay employees, as they currently stand, the government is saying under this new manifesto there would be no legal reason to carry out these fire and rehire practices. And as I said, in real life as well, it's not something that we would advocate. It's not something that we see happen or even talked about very often, because there are ways around it. You can consult with employees. If companies are going through a difficult financial situation, there are things that you can do, cutting costs. It might be that you might need to go through a redundancy process and just shrink your workforce slightly for a period of time to allow you to then grow again. You'd be looking at things like that rather than going through a blanket kind of fire and rehire practice. So we don't see that this proposal is going to be a huge impact on the clients that we work with and in our industries. It's potentially more so for businesses who sort of hire more kind of lower paid staff, where there's a lot of churn and where they might just kind of consistently be changing their contracts because they're sort of adapting to how the kind of world of work is looking. But we don't see it happening very, very often at all. And there's been some research done by the CIPD. This is a little bit outdated, from 2021. But even so, even back then, it was only 2.9% of organisations had engaged in a fire and rehire practice. So we know it's not prevalent, but it will definitely become even less so moving forwards. Any questions on that one before we move on? Okay. Next thing under contracts, as Holly mentioned earlier, is around 0-hour contracts. So again, this isn't a 0-hour contract is not particularly prevalent. If you work in an office, if you're in the marketing industry, media, that sort of thing. It's more so where you get to hospitality, tourism, retail, where work fluctuates, where you have shift work. And what the Labour government is trying to do with this new legislation is to sort of crack down on contracts that are basically exploitative to the individual. And so, what they're essentially saying is that current 0-hour contracts don't give those individuals any stability. They don't give them any guaranteed hours. They don't give them any real understanding of how much money potentially they're going to take home each week, each month. They also generally don't have things like long notice periods, if notice periods at all. A lot of 0-hour contracts just have a straight, we can terminate immediately. You also, individuals don't get all of the employment rights that, employed employees get. 0 hours workers get some of those rights, but not all of them. So there are some businesses out there that use 0 hours contracts in a way to essentially be exploitative. Not all businesses, but there are some, and it's those businesses that this kind of legislation is looking to crack down on. Again, it's not saying that these kind of variable contracts aren't possible, but what they are saying is that going forwards, what they want to have in place is some level of guaranteed hours. So you can't just give someone a contract that says, we might give you shifts, we might not give you shifts, and we won't tell you until, on a weekly basis or something. What they're currently proposing under this legislation is that there'll be guaranteed hours, and those guaranteed hours will be based on the previous 12 weeks that person has worked for the business. So you can sort of see what's the average that they've worked, and that will then become the guaranteed hours that individual will get going forwards. Obviously, if it's a new person coming in, there will have to be a starting off a minimum hours. And again, we don't know exactly what this looks like. It's probably going to be fairly low, so it could be something like 10 hours. As a starting point until you get to that 12-week period where you can actually do an assessment of how many hours that individual has worked across the 12 weeks. So again, this is just giving individuals who work in that kind of industry just a bit more stability and a bit more understanding of what's their salary going to be looking like on a monthly basis. If they agree to shifts, that their shifts aren't going to change just all of a sudden, like the day before or the day of. They're still going to have, or they will have more stability and kind of rights going forwards. So as I say, in a lot of industries and a lot of companies that we work with, 0-hour contracts is not particularly prevalent. But it does work for some industries, and also for some people. This is not just, these don't just benefit businesses, they benefit people who need that level of flexibility, who need the ability to be able to say, yes, I can work that day, but I can't work that day, and I need to do morning shifts, but I can't do evening shifts, and all that sort of thing. So as I said earlier, not all businesses are using 0 hours contracts in the wrong way. But they just want to make sure that all workers who are on a kind of a low hour contract have some level of cover and stability. Any questions on that one? No. Okay. So then the right to switch off. So what this is essentially saying is, and what they're trying to do here is basically to give employees the opportunity to be able to switch off from work, have that work-life balance, and I think, for those of us who worked through the pandemic, when you were working from home 5 days a week, it did become really difficult to switch off at the end of the working day, because your work at your home basically became your work, your office. So, I certainly found it difficult to kind of close my laptop at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and then go into kind of home mode. So the sort of purpose of this is to try and make sure that employees have that opportunity to switch off at the end of the workday, not to be contacted during that time. And that's, you know, by email, phone, WhatsApp, text, you know, whatever, Slack, whatever kind of method of communication your business uses, is that you have the right to not be contacted outside of your working hours. And you have the right, you know, even if you are contacted, not to respond. And, you know, you won't get, you know, into any trouble. It won't be a detriment to you if you don't work, you know, outside of your working hours. There's not a huge amount of detail around this one. They have sort of said that they'll follow similar models to those that are in currently place in Ireland and Belgium. But those two models are different. So it sounds like what they're going to do is kind of do a bit of a hybrid of both. So in Ireland, for instance, they have a code of practice in place, which sets out clearly what the obligations are. In Belgium, for instance, they sort of take it a little bit further, and they actually have more kind of stringent laws in place, where it's actually, you know, illegal to be forcing employees to work outside of their working hours. We don't know whether this will come into force in 2026. This might be something that they take longer to look at, and there's kind of more iterations that will come out before anything kind of concrete comes into place. I expect that will be the case, that this won't be something that comes in. But having said that, I think from a sort of best practice perspective, from a employee wellbeing perspective, you know, all employers should be removing, if it is there currently, removing that expectation for employees to be consistently working outside of their working hours. Obviously, we know there's busy times. There might be the odd day, or maybe there's a couple of weeks where there's something big going on, that, you know, there's a deadline looming and you need to put in more hours. You know, I think in those sort of circumstances, everyone sort of understands that you need to put in a bit more time, but that should be the exception rather than the kind of norm of working sort of over sort of 40 hours a week. So we would definitely recommend that you kind of look at your working practices, and whether there are things that you can do to kind of remove any expectations that might currently be in place. We've seen with some of our clients that they have stopped using WhatsApp, for instance, as a method of contacting each other, because obviously you use WhatsApp personally as well, and it's very difficult to ignore work messages coming in when you're using it personally. So some of our clients have just said, we just won't be, you know, we won't contact via WhatsApp. That's a personal method of communication. We will only contact on email or, you know, Slack, Teams, those sorts of things. You know, other businesses have put in place things like the delayed send. So even if you choose to, or you need to work late, you're not sending emails to your colleagues really late into the evening. You do what you need to do, you delay send, and then it goes to them 9 o'clock the next morning, which is then during their working hours. So it's little things like that you can already be doing, and I know lots of businesses are already doing, just to allow people to have that time to switch off. You know, we all need time to just relax, you know, be with family, do things outside of work, you know, our hobbies, you know, all those sorts of things. And it's not always easy in this kind of hybrid way of working to be able to do that. So anything that businesses can do to support that work-life balance is only a good thing. Any questions on this one before we move on?
I was just going to ask, Dee, how do you see this maybe impacting if there are like contractual terms? Obviously, like, I think businesses have a clause in the contract around the potential to need to work on occasion, like you were saying. So is that something that we might be looking to have to remove as part of this?
I don't think
Probably
businesses will have to remove it. I think you may have to be clearer in terms of what that will look like, and have some parameters around it, so it won't be as loose and sort of overarching as it currently is. I think there will still be the opportunity, as I say, where there are just going to be times where you need to, but it's going to be much more the exception than the rule. And so I do think that contract wording will need to be amended, but I don't think that will have to come out completely.
okay.
So now we will move on to sexual harassment, and over to Holly.
Thanks, Dee. Perfect. So as you will know, as of October 2024, the Worker Protection Act came into force. So a lot of businesses have been doing work to ensure that they are compliant with these changes. What this means is that the new legislation means that there is a legal obligation on employers to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment from happening in the workplace. And what that essentially means is that you need to be looking at your workforce and identifying where those risks are, and be proactively identifying where those risks are. And what we mean by risks are that it could mean a number of things, but most commonly things such as a lack of policies, a lack of clear escalation or reporting channels in order to report when harassment has occurred in the workplace. It could also even go down as kind of workplace culture and tolerance to inappropriate behaviour, whether that's comments, whether that's interactions with one another as colleagues. Also things such as power imbalances, and thinking about where people may be working in isolation, or where people may have more customer-facing roles. So really understanding within your business and within your various units where the heightened risks are, so you can put various things in place. And that goes on to the next part of kind of the legislation in terms of implementing factors that might mitigate risks of any form of sexual harassment from happening. And I'll go on in a little bit to talk about what that might look like. But in terms of the legislation and what that actually means for you as a business, it means that if an employee were to bring a sexual harassment claim and it went to tribunal, if they were to consider that the sexual harassment had happened and that preventative measures were not put in place, this means that the business would be at risk of paying an additional 25% on top of the compensation. And they would really look into what the business had done to proactively talk about sexual harassment and prevent it from occurring within the workplace. So in terms of what these preventative measures can look like, one of the main things and areas of focus that businesses have been doing from October up until now is really thinking about updating your policies and updating your handbook. So you've got really clear dignity at work policies in terms of those reporting channels and what your employees need to do if they feel they're ever in a situation where sexual harassment is occurring. Training should really occur for both managers and employees from very different lenses, where managers have the right skills if they do see sexual harassment occurring or it's reported to them, that they know exactly how to follow the policy and the appropriate legislation that surrounds what's deemed sexual harassment. And then from an employee lens, it's thinking about those clear reporting channels. So what are the steps that they need to take in order to tell the business that this has happened? and also that they will feel supported in doing so. So where we've really been helping our clients over the last couple of months is making sure that we've updated their handbooks, because it's not just about your dignity at work policy. It also reaches beyond that in terms of thinking about your IT and your social policies that might be within your handbook, and how that extends to the protection around sexual harassment. We've also been creating dignity at work policies for our clients, but also for them to have this for any third parties that they work with. So within agencies, there are quite often a large population of freelancers, and ensuring that also your freelance staff also know that they are covered by your dignity at work policy, and that the same appropriate steps would be taken if they also felt that sexual harassment had happened in the workplace. The other thing that we've really been helping businesses to do is to carry out those risk assessments. I think it can be a hard thing for a business to know how to properly review in terms of where are those risks within your business and where to actually start. And our recommendation for the business that we've been working with is to really start with that risk assessment, understand what current practices you've got in place, what additional practices or policies or principles that you might be putting in place. And then those proactive preventative measures should really be highlighted in your dignity at work policy to state things such as you train your managers and employees on an annual basis. You may have introduced specific policies around individuals that do work in isolation or potentially have more customer-facing roles, so that they really know what their rights are in instances where they feel uncomfortable, and that they've got the protection of the business in instances where they may want to remove themselves from that situation. So really calling out what you do as a business in order to protect these people is a key part of how we see these policies actually coming to life for you within your handbooks. The other thing is that we've really been supporting our clients on running sexual harassment, anti-sexual harassment workshops, so that all managers do attend as a mandatory part of their training, so that they are equipped to handle such situations, that they really understand what forms sexual harassment, because there's a huge variety of things, and in relation to the fact that, you know, intent doesn't really form part of an excuse as to why that behaviour is deemed sexual harassment or not. We've seen a lot of people within the workforce really start to understand actually the breadth of what can actually be housed under this sexual harassment legislation. So making sure your managers are really thoroughly are trained, and likewise with your employees, so that they understand that they also have a responsibility in ensuring that they are supporting their colleagues when potential behaviour might be occurring within their workplace. The additional part of cover that forms part of the change that happened in October is also an automatic protection under the whistleblowing legislation. So if you were to disclose a sexual harassment instance, that additional cover for employees as well. We can work with any businesses in order to conduct those risk assessments and to understand the necessary steps that you need to take. So if this isn't something that you've quite yet got around to acting on, or potentially halfway through, we can absolutely help any businesses that need that extra pair of hands. The CIPD and People Management actually did a review of how this legislation was doing, and kind of how people had acted upon it up until now. And there are a lot of businesses that are still quite far behind on these changes and how they can actually bring it to life within their business. So if you are one of those individuals that hasn't yet acted on it, or feel that you haven't acted on it in all its entirety, kind of all the changes, then do give us a shout, and we'd be happy to kind of walk you through where we feel there could be improvements. Any questions on this in terms of how people have found it to date, or any gaps that you think that you haven't yet covered? Perfect. Wonderful. So we thought we'd finish off really quickly in terms of some of the changes that we do know are coming into play for 2025. So there are the statutory increases to the normal things that we do see increases in. So your national minimum wage, your national living wage. There are also changes to family-friendly rates as well. Sick pay, redundancy pay, and also the discrimination award bans. So from now up until April, it's a really good idea for you as a business to take a look at how this affects your business. And also if you do call out any of the statutory amounts within your policies in your handbook, to get into a place where you're prepped for the new tax year, so that you're quoting the appropriate statutory rate. Other changes that have been spoken about is, of course, the national insurance contribution going up to 15%, and that obviously having a huge impact on businesses. We're not going to touch on that too much today in terms of actions, but obviously that is something that, as a business, a lot of businesses have been looking at how this affects them from a financial point of view, and kind of their growth opportunities as well. 2 points that I'm going to go into slightly more detail about is the neonatal care, which is expected to take effect in April 2025, and the changes there. So this is granting parents up to 12 weeks of paid leave if their baby is admitted to hospital. There is some qualifying criteria that you have to meet in order to be able to use this. And that is, the baby must be admitted within the first 28 days after birth. And they also must remain in hospital for a continuous period of 7 days or more. They've also got the continuous service qualification as well. So as an employee, you must have at least 26 weeks worth of employment with that business. And you must earn on average at least 123 per week, which is aligning to the maternity pay eligibility criteria there as well. The leave, so that the 12 weeks leave must be taken within the first 68 weeks following the baby's birth. And this is an entitlement in addition to existing maternity, paternity, and shared parental leave rights. So you can definitely kind of combine those together. The second one, where we expect this to come into play for 2025, but yet some of the details still need to be confirmed, and we're expecting to hear more, is the Paternity Leave Bereavement Act. So there are changes that are coming into play. There's existing legislation surrounding this. So currently, in order to take this, there is a requirement again for the employee to have 26 weeks continuous service with a business to qualify for this. And this gave an additional 2 weeks of leave for anyone on paternity if a child dies under 18 or is in stillbirth after 24 weeks of pregnancy. So this could be taken on top of paternity leave. The change that they're proposing to make here is that it's going to be an immediate, you're going to immediately be eligible for this. So they are removing the 24-week service requirement, making the paternity leave and the bereavement leave a day one right for bereaved parents. So you don't have to have that qualifying criteria there. Whilst the Act itself hasn't specifically mentioned the increase in leave duration, there are talks and there are plans to try and extend either paternity leave or the bereavement qualification for partners from 2 weeks additional leave up to 52 weeks in the case where the baby passes away. Yet they haven't confirmed what the details surrounding that are as of yet. So we're expected to hear more within 2025 on that point. They're also trying to permit partners to also take kit days on bereavement leave as well, meaning that they can come back to the business, keeping in touch day like you'd have for paternity and maternity leave and shared parental leave, so that you can come back to the business, understand what's going on, but also go back off on bereavement leave. So that's an additional ask that's going through the proposal. The Act has also kept open the possibility for the potential protection of redundancy of a bereaved employee after they return to work. So again, mirroring what we have in place for maternity rights. The scope of this policy applies to where a mother of a newborn child or the person with whom the child is adopting. So it's going to be covered for adoption purposes, surrogacy, and also where a mother has birthed that baby as well. So they're making that clearer as part of that the proposed changes to this Act. The final thing as well, obviously, as it currently stands in legislation, making sure that businesses are ready for the gender pay reporting for over 250 employees, and making sure that you're doing the preparations running up to that as well. Any questions on any of those points? Perfect. So in terms of next steps and any questions, we will open up for anyone to have any questions for us, so you're not just listening to us. But I believe that the session is being recorded, so we will send around the recording for everyone to have and to tap back into if you want to listen to it again after today's session. We appreciate that's a lot of new information to absorb all at once. We will also follow up with a survey to get your feedback. So we'd love to understand how you found the session, if there's any particular area you'd like us to go into greater detail potentially in a future session. And also please reach out to JourneyHR if you do want support in anything that we've discussed today or beyond that. We're very happy to speak to new clients and to explore how we may be able to support you. We'll also hold another update once we understand and have more clarity on any of the changes that we've spoken through today. That's likely to be later on in the year once we've got a little bit more information. So if you'd like to join another session where we do have a bit more information, just look out for any updates that we put on our socials. We're very active on LinkedIn, so give us a follow if you'd like to see what we may be doing in the future. But we will open the floor up for anyone that has any questions on any of the topics that we've spoken about.
Of all the things that you've gone through today, what do you think is going to have the biggest impact, apart from maybe the national insurance contribution, because that's a biggie in itself?
Yeah, I think it will be, from my side, I think it will be the unfair dismissal changes. I think it will have a huge impact on really making sure that your recruitment process is, for one, so even before you've got people through the door, I think you need to be really thinking about whether you have the right recruitment processes in place to assess candidates correctly, to ensure they've got the right skills and capabilities to form part of your business. And then it stems all the way through from kind of managing performance effectively in probation. Unfortunately, we do see time and time again, managers not taking the probation period as seriously as it needs to be, and getting to the end of that probation period and having conversations with us whereby they either want to extend it or they want to fail an employee, but they've not actually had check-ins with any of the employees throughout that probation period. So the employee is none the wiser as to whether they're doing well or not. As and when this unfair dismissal change comes into play, that's going to be far riskier for a business to act in that way and to not properly manage those probations. So there's a huge amount of risk. There's a huge amount of upskilling, I believe, in terms of managers effectively managing performance and not shying away from a culture of feedback and a culture of support through that probation period. And of course, that comes with cost. It comes with, cost of training, but also cost of getting it wrong. We at the moment have that 2-year grace period. In one way, it's amazing that it's coming into place because we really should be treating every employee, regardless of their length of service, with the right amount of respect of managing their performance effectively. But it's going to take quite a lot of effort, I think, for business to get their heads around the fact that they do need to be kind of more on the pulse with managing performance from day one.
And what I can't, and I totally agree with all of what you just said, but what I can't work out, you talk about at the beginning, the day one rights encourage mobility, but with the unfair dismissal being reduced, probation periods getting longer, I can't work out whether that's going to increase or reduce mobility, because people might go, oh, I've got a longer probationary period, so actually I can just leave because I don't, is it going to increase or decrease mobility, I suppose?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, there is protection on both sides, right? If you increase that probation period for 6 months, it's also down to the employee having a good amount of time to bed in and see whether they are feeling supported. They feel that they're the kind of the role that they've been sold marries up to actually the reality of that role, and whether it's the type of company they want to work with. Whether that's going to increase mobility, I'm unsure, to tell you the truth. I don't know. I think we'll have to kind of wait and see how that plays out. I think employers will certainly get more attention during that probation period, and more one-to-one time with their manager if businesses do follow.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah, which is only a good thing.
I just wonder, anyone on this call today, if they've started preparing for this and start looking at new processes, if anyone's got any hints or tips.
Yeah, the company I work for, obviously we became quite aware of the sexual harassment changes coming into effect quite quickly. So basically we outsourced our sexual harassment training to a company called the Consent Collective. And what they did was they have this video. It goes on for about 45 minutes to an hour. It covers all aspects of sexual harassment, how that training's rolled out. It's really quite simple for the staff members to actually get involved in it as well. So we bought like a batch of licenses and sent them all out to the staff members. So we've had quite a good uptake on it. Most of them have actually completed it, and I'm just chasing the tailors now that are just dragging their heels and not got it complete yet.
Yeah,
that was probably one of the best things. And yeah, generally we've just been going over our policies and our employee handbook and just tweaking little bits here and there to make it more compliant and a little bit more clearer in some parts.
That's great.
Definitely. We've also seen an uptake on similarly, we partnered with the Consent Collective to do a similar thing, David, and to provide those kind of virtual e-modules for employees to engage with. I think particularly for the employee workforce, I think an e-module works quite effectively, and you can track who's completed it. We found more uptake on a face-to-face session with managers, whereby they really need to understand what can constitute sexual harassment and how to intervene in an appropriate way. So yeah, I agree, David, that those e-modules work really effectively for an employee base.
Yeah, I agree on your points as well. Like you say, the e-modules are really, really easy for people to complete in a relatively short space of time. But yeah, I do think managers generally, the higher you go up the ladder, so to speak, the more face-to-face engagement is needed in order to get the importance of certain elements across. The e-modules just don't tick the boxes at that higher level.
And I think the other thing is the more responsibility kind of lies on your shoulders, the more senior you become. If you're the owner of a business, if you're the MD, CEO, part of the leadership team, there is a huge amount of responsibility on you to make sure that you are training your kind of middle managers and everybody else in your team to get these things right. As a business, you are relying on your managers to do the right thing. But the only way they can do the right thing is if you're upskilling them and showing them what that looks like, and giving them the support to be able to do that effectively. And unfortunately, we've seen over the years that people get promoted into those manager positions, but don't necessarily get the training and get the support to be able to do it. They're just expected to all of a sudden become a people manager and just get it right. And that doesn't come naturally to everyone. So I think as part of a lot of this legislation that will be coming in over the next year or so, there is going to be a lot more onus on managers to get it right. And the kind of consequences of not getting it right is going to be much harsher for businesses. So whilst we know that training managers is not cheap, actually the potential cost to the business of getting it wrong is probably tenfold to what it would cost you to train managers in the first place. So that is definitely one of the things that we're constantly talking to companies about, is that making sure that you are training your managers really well so they know what to do in most of these circumstances, and if they don't, they know where to go before they get it wrong.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I've seen quite a few occasions where people have started off in like really entry-level positions, got to like a team leader where they've got like 2 or 3 people underneath them, and then suddenly 6 months later they're thrust into a managerial position where they've then got 10, 15, 20 people reporting. And if you don't give them that necessary support and training, they just collapse. I've seen people go to absolute meltdowns where they've just not been able to deal with the concept of having 15, 20 people coming up to them asking for advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is understandable as well, isn't it? If you don't have that skill set already and you're not being supported with that, then for a lot of people it is too much pressure. And that we don't want to get to that point.
No, I totally agree with it. It can be quite overwhelming.
Great. Well, any more questions from anyone? Someone's just here put in the chat, thank you very much for an interesting and productive session. And I think that kind of really sums it up. You guys have made it really, really clear. And I hadn't even thought about some of the things you talked about today. So thank you so much. And we'll be circulating a summary of the session today, as well as a link to the video. And thank you so much, Holly and Danielle. It's